What if the strongest man in the world was fighting a battle no one could see? This is the untold truth behind Jonah Lomu, the giant whose heart roared louder than the crowd. If you haven't already, hit subscribe now because this chapter will change the way you see greatness forever. The silence after the storm, after the World Cup in South Africa, the world still trembled with his name. Jonah Lomu, the unstoppable force, the human hurricane, the man who turned rugby into poetry in motion. But when the cheers faded, when the lights dimmed and the stadium emptied, there was something no one saw. In the quiet hours of the night, Jonah would sit alone, not in victory, but in exhaustion. His muscles ached in a way no amount of training could fix. His breath came shorter, his strength faded faster. The world thought he was resting. In truth, he was breaking. Diagnosis: it began as fatigue. Then came the dizziness, the swollen ankles, the headaches that refused to leave. Doctors ran their tests. Jonah expected the usual: exhaustion, maybe a virus. He sat in the small white room, a towel still around his neck from training, sweat drying on his skin. When the doctor came back, his face said it all. The silence before he spoke was heavier than any tackle Jonah had ever taken. "Jonah," he said softly, "you have a kidney disorder. It's serious. You'll need treatment soon." Jonah blinked for a moment. He didn't understand. He was the strongest man on earth. He didn't get sick. His body was a weapon, a machine. The doctor continued, words blurring together. Dialysis failure, transplant. Jonah's mind drifted. He stared at his hands, those enormous hands that had crushed tackles and carried nations. Now they trembled slightly. He said nothing. Because what could a giant say when his own body turned against him? The secret war. Jonah didn't tell the team. Not yet. He couldn't. The world didn't need to see the cracks, so he trained harder, pushed further. Each run, each lift, each tackle became a battle not against opponents, but against his own flesh. He would wake before dawn, ignoring the pain in his back, the ache in his bones. He would stare at himself in the mirror, sweat dripping down, whispering, "You're still Jonah Lomu, you don't stop." But at night, when no one was watching, he would lie awake listening to the sound of his heartbeat, uneven, stubborn. And beneath that, a quieter sound, the slow ticking of time running out, the mask of the giant. To the public, Jonah was still the unstoppable legend. On camera, he smiled, he joked, but off the field, he was hooked to machines. He would play a full match on Saturday and then spend Monday morning in a hospital chair, his blood being cleaned by tubes and filters. The nurses watched in silence as this mountain of a man sat quietly, head bowed, eyes distant. He never complained. He never asked, "Why me?" Once, a nurse asked how he managed to keep smiling. Jonah just shrugged. "If I stop smiling," he said, "the world will think I've stopped fighting." And so he kept smiling. Love and the light that stayed. Amid the pain came something new: love. Jonah met the woman who would become his wife, his anchor. She saw beyond the fame, beyond the myth. She saw the man who still carried the heart of a boy from South Auckland. Together, they built a small world away from the noise, a home, laughter, quiet mornings. For the first time in years, Jonah felt peace. Then came the moment that changed everything. He became a father. The day his son was born, Jonah held him gently, afraid his giant hands might crush something so small, so pure. He looked down at the tiny heartbeat on his chest and whispered, "You'll never have to be as strong as me, just brave enough to be you." In that instant, all the trophies, all the fame, all the noise, it meant nothing. The world could forget Jonah Lomu, the rugby god. But he would make sure his son would remember Jonah Lomu, the man. The return, years passed. His illness worsened. He received a kidney transplant. For a time, hope returned. He smiled wider. He felt stronger. He even spoke about one last comeback, not to dominate, but to show the world what fighting truly looked like. In 2005, he stepped onto a rugby field once more. The crowd erupted. They knew this wasn't the same Jonah, slower, weaker, but it didn't matter. Every step he took was a triumph, every breath a victory. When the ball touched his hands, a familiar electricity surged through the air. He ran, not like before, but enough to make the stadium rise. The defenders didn't dare tackle him hard. It wasn't pity, it was reverence. They knew they were standing before living history. After the match, Jonah sat in the locker room. Same benches, same silence, but this time, the fear was gone. He looked around, breathing slowly, soaking in every detail, the smell of sweat, the distant hum of the crowd, the faint vibration of life still happening. He smiled to himself and whispered, "You were never about the wins, you were about the fight." The Giants' last days, in the years that followed, Jonah became a voice of hope. He traveled, met fans, inspired children. He spoke not about victory, but about resilience, about waking up each day and choosing to move forward, no matter the odds. But the illness was patient, it waited. By 2015, his health declined sharply. The hospital visits grew longer, the silence deeper. And yet, in those final months, he never let despair in. He laughed with his children. He called old teammates. He told stories. He made promises he knew he might never keep. But he said them anyway because hope was still his weapon. When the end came, it was gentle ... early morning. Soft light spilling through the window, his family nearby, the giant rested. The world mourns, news spread like wildfire. Jonah Lomu had passed away. Age, just 40, the rugby world fell silent. Fans across continents wept, stadiums dimmed their lights. Teams stood shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, as screens replayed his greatest runs, those unstoppable bursts of power that had once made the earth shake. But what people remembered most wasn't the tries or the trophies. It was the humanity, the humility, the fight behind the smile. In New Zealand, at his funeral, children wore black jerseys with his number. They placed rugby balls beside flowers, small tokens for a man who had made them believe in something bigger. And as the sun set that evening, the sky over Auckland burned gold and red, as if even the heavens were saying goodbye to their giant. Legacy, years later, young players still whisper his name before stepping onto the field. They study his runs, his power, his fearlessness, but what they try to copy most is his heart. Because Jonah Lomu changed more than the game, he changed what strength meant. Strength, he showed, was not just muscle or speed, it was standing tall when life bends you. It was smiling through pain, it was fighting a war no one sees, and doing it with grace. His story lives on not in statistics, but in the pulse of every player who dares to dream, in every fan who remembers that greatness is not perfection, it's perseverance. The final words, Jonah Lomu's story isn't about rugby. It's about humanity, it's about the boy who became a giant, and the giant who never stopped being human. He taught the world that legends don't live forever, but the spirit behind them can. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more real stories of courage, pain, and triumph, the kind that remind us why we fall in love with sport, and with the people who dare to play it.